Howdy y'all, welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. I found this Outlaw Gunslinger Series Kit number 2 Gentleman Jim Jameson hired gun at my local hobby store. I decided it would be a great addition to my Wild Imaginary West, with a few customizations of course. The kit came with 2 sprues, one for the horse and one for the Outlaw. I carefully clipped all the pieces from their sprues. I removed the leftover sprue marks and I shaved down all the mold lines to get them ready for assembly. After that, I used some plastic weld from Plastruct to bond all the pieces together. A good method is to apply the cement to both surfaces you wish to bond. This makes them tacky, they will hold together better without as much force while the cement dries. After assembling the horse's body, I equipped the horse with a saddle, saddlebags, blanket, and of course a long-range rifle. After that, I assembled the rider. I really liked the characterful pose of this rider, but I just can't get behind the height of the hat. I know he considers himself to be a gentleman, but I just can't take him seriously while he looks like he's trying to get Oliver Twist to become a pickpocket. After the figure had been fully assembled, it was time to incorporate him into the Wild Imaginary West. I broke into my bits box and I scratch-built a little machine to go on the horse's back. This machine, and many of the other machines you'll see in the Wild Imaginary West, serve a few purposes. For one, they act as generators and power supplies, also can be used for communication, and finally, they help deter monsters. Like many animals, the monsters of the Wild West can hear frequencies that humans can't. They are attracted to some and bothered by others. This machine has the ability to emit a range of frequencies that act as a repellent for certain monsters. Not all monsters are scared away by the sounds, but definitely enough to make navigating the Wild West more manageable. This revolutionary machine is what allowed humans to expand out west of the Mississippi, where the territory of the monsters begins. I decided to replace one of the horse's legs with a cybernetic machine leg. I used the horse's original leg as the template for the new leg. I superglued the pieces together at first, but then I ended up soldering them instead to create a more secure bond. In this particular instance, the machine on the horse's back has also been customized to bring power to the cybernetic limb. I installed some cables from the machine to the leg to make that a little more obvious. I drilled a hole through the man's hands and I gave him some reins, which I then attached to the horse's bridle. And like I mentioned earlier, I decided to take a few inches off the top hat and give him a less chocolate factory owner vibe. And that was the figure customizations done, but before I could paint him, I needed to make sure my workspace was nice and clean. After that, I took the figure outside and I primed it. Before moving on to the painting of the figure, I decided to set it aside for a bit. I threw on some gloves because I was going to be handling resin. This is Oliver Spaeth of Honor Guard Miniatures. Oliver does beautiful mini painting and diorama work and has a great selection of files for sale on his My Mini Factory, including this display with a raised back for backdrop paintings. If you have a 3D printer and are looking for something fun to incorporate into your diorama game, go check him out. And give him a follow on Instagram while you're at it. The fun thing about this display base is that it allows you to have a foreground to pose your figure on and a backdrop to give the diorama greater scale and environmental context. I used some pre-made plaster rocks to create the small piece of terrain for the foreground. I found a position for the rock that would allow the horse to look natural, but I needed to shim it on the left to give it the correct angle. I used little plaster rock bits to fill the gaps and make the whole thing look more natural, and I decided to give the rock some overhang on either side, just for fun. After I was happy with the look and all the rocks had been glued in place, I took it outside and I primed it. After it was dry, I began the painting. I started by painting the background. I painted on a gradient of light blue, fading down to nearly white, and then I painted on some faint clouds. I then painted on the silhouette of some distant rock spires. I used a photo of Monument Valley as a reference. The Wild Imaginary West is set in an alternate historical America. That's why many of the scenes I've depicted, and will continue to depict, including this one, are from real places around the region, including locations from Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, and more. I decided to include a lone red-tailed hawk to help break up the vastness of the desert sky. To improve the feeling of depth and perspective, I masked off the butte in the midground and I sprayed a light haze on the background with the airbrush. Off camera, I added some haze between the midground and the foreground as well. I then masked off the whole back of the diorama and I painted the rock itself. I gave it a color scheme that would be befitting of the warm colored rocks of Monument Valley. After that, I peeled off the masking tape and the base was done, and then it was time to move on to the figure. Instead of talking about what I'm doing on screen, I'm going to explain a little bit more of the history of the wild imaginary West. From the settling of America, the West remained mostly uninhabited. Past the Mississippi, large and aggressive animals kept the land inhospitable for human development. It was too costly and dangerous to homestead, and without a chain of settlements for resupplies, prospecting just wasn't worth it. There was a vote to use the military to clear the West of the giant beasts, but the cost was seen as too great for too little return, so the nation voted against it. The development and distribution of the machines seen on this guy's horse involved some very important people and was riddled with conflict, controversy, and tragedy, something I'll explain in a future video. In spite of the odds, the creation of these devices did happen and allowed the average person to travel in greater safety throughout the West. This triggered the slow beginnings of Western expansion. The danger was still great, but prospectors, trappers, and hunters and fools decided there was enough of a reward for them out west. And as always, when somebody leads the way, people are sure to follow. There is a lot more to this world that I have written, and I'm excited to share it with you guys. After the cowboy was painted, I painted the sides of the diorama with black 3.0. I glued the cowboy in place, and I threw on some little tufts of grass. After that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.